The broadcast began with a cold, mechanical hum as the Galactic Empire's insignia, an ornate crest of interlocking silver and crimson lines, filled every screen across human-controlled space. Millions of humans across Earth and its colonies stopped what they were doing, their attention drawn to the ominous transmission that was being forced onto every public and private channel. The hum faded, replaced by the deep, resonant voice of an alien announcer, speaking in perfect but emotionless English. "This is a message from the High Council of the Galactic Empire to the people of Earth," the voice declared. The screen shifted to show a massive, dimly lit arena. Towering alien figures, Vicarans, the ruling species of the Empire, stood in silent rows, their biomechanical armor gleaming under the harsh lights. Their elongated blue-skinned forms and featureless black eyes gave them an air of unrelenting menace. At the center of the arena were thousands of humans, shackled and kneeling, their faces hollow with despair. General Alexander Kane stood rigid in his office at Earth Defense Command, his jaw clenched so tightly it felt as though it might shatter. He was a man of imposing stature, his grizzled face marked with the scars of countless battles. A silent crowd of officers and soldiers had gathered around him, their faces illuminated by the glow of the broadcast. No one spoke. No one dared to break the suffocating tension. The camera in the arena panned across the sea of condemned humans, men, women, and even children. They were survivors of humanity's fledgling colony on Epsilon Prime, a world that had dared to resist the Empire's harsh rule. The Vicarans had made an example of them, crushing the rebellion and capturing its people. Now, they were to be executed, live, for all to see. A figure stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. Emperor Taylor, the ruler of the Galactic Empire, was taller than any of his subjects. His voice, amplified and translated into human languages, was calm and deliberate, yet laced with contempt. 70,000 of your kind, he began, his tone almost conversational, chose defiance over submission. They chose rebellion over order. This is the price of such choices. Kane's fist tightened, his nails dug into his palms, but the pain was distant, irrelevant. His mind raced, grappling with the sheer scale of the atrocity about to unfold. He had fought the Vicarans before, had seen their brutality firsthand, but this was different. This wasn't war. It was genocide masquerading as justice. The execution began without further ceremony. Massive platforms rose from the arena floor, each equipped with long rows of hanging nooses. The humans were marched forward in orderly lines, their faces betraying a mix of terror and resignation. The Vicarans watched in silence, their expressionless faces betraying no hint of emotion. The camera lingered on the first group as the nooses were tightened around their necks. Then, with a single mechanical sound, the platforms beneath them dropped. Kane closed his eyes, but it was no use. The sound of the crowd's collective gasp, the awful silence that followed, and the grim finality of it all were seared into his mind. Around him, officers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away, others clenched their teeth, barely restraining their anger. A younger officer, barely in his 20s, muttered under his breath, "Monsters." The broadcast continued, group after group meeting the same fate. Each execution was clinical, efficient, and utterly devoid of mercy. Kane's eyes opened, his gaze hard and unwavering. He forced himself to watch every moment, to remember every face. These were his people, his responsibility. He had failed them once. He would not fail them again. When the last human had fallen, the camera returned to Emperor Taylor. "Let this be a lesson," the alien ruler declared, his voice heavy with finality. "Humanity's place in the galaxy is not to question, but to obey. Rebellion will be met with annihilation. Submit, and you may yet survive." The broadcast ended abruptly, the screen going dark. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the distant hum of the command center's machinery. Then the silence shattered. Officers began shouting, their voices a chaotic mix of outrage and sorrow. Some called for immediate retaliation, others for restraint. Kane let them argue. His mind was already elsewhere. He turned to face his officers, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Enough! The room fell silent again, all eyes on him. Kane's voice was steady, but the fury beneath it was unmistakable. 70,000 of our people were murdered today. Not soldiers, not combatants, families, civilians, children. The Empire thinks they can break us, that will cower and fall in line. They're wrong. A younger officer, Lieutenant Harper, stepped forward, his expression conflicted. Sir, with respect, our forces are no match for theirs. The Empire's fleets outnumber us 100 to 1. Their technology is centuries ahead. If we retaliate... Kane silenced him with a glare. We've been outnumbered before. We've faced impossible odds before. And every time, humanity has endured. Today, the Empire reminded us what we're fighting for. They reminded us why we can't afford to lose. He turned away from the officers, walking to the large window that overlooked Earth's sprawling capital. His reflection stared back at him, his steel-gray eyes filled with a determination that bordered on obsession. 70,000 lives, he muttered, almost to himself. 70,000 reasons to fight. The weight of his words hung in the air. The officers exchanged glances, their initial hesitation giving way to a grim sense of purpose. One by one, they nodded, their resolve hardening. They had all seen the broadcast. They had all felt the same helpless rage. Now, they had a leader willing to turn that rage into action. Kane's voice rose, addressing the room once more. We don't have the luxury of waiting for the perfect moment or the ideal conditions. The Empire thinks they're invincible, that we're too weak, too divided to strike back. We'll prove them wrong. We'll show them what it means to cross humanity. He paused, letting the words sink in. Then, with a final, commanding tone, he said, "Prepare the fleet. Notify all colonies and outposts. Humanity goes to war." As the officers dispersed to carry out his orders, Kane remained by the window, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun was setting, casting the sky in hues of crimson and gold. It was a fitting backdrop, he thought, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the light could still fight its way through. In the quiet that followed, he allowed himself a single moment of vulnerability. Closing his eyes, he whispered, "This isn't vengeance. It's justice." The room behind him bustled with activity, a storm of preparations for the battle to come. Kane opened his eyes, his resolve stronger than ever. The Empire had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would pay the price. The air at Titan Base was thick with tension, the kind that clung to the skin and sank into the bones. General Alexander Kane stepped onto the command deck, his boots striking the steel floor with deliberate purpose. Around him, the room buzzed with activity. Holographic displays flickered, projecting tactical data, fleet formations, and resource inventories. Officers moved quickly, their voices clipped, their expressions grim. The broadcast had reached every corner of humanity's domain, and the rage it ignited burned as brightly here as it had on Earth. Yet, amidst the chaos, Kane exuded an almost unnerving calm, a stillness that spoke of calculated intent. Admiral Ryan Carter, Kane's trusted strategist, approached, his sharp features drawn tight. Carter was a man of contrasts. His carefully combed hair and pristine uniform gave him the air of a diplomat, but his piercing green eyes betrayed the mind of a tactician constantly calculating odds. "General," Carter began, his tone heavy, "we received confirmation. The colonies on Mars, Titan, and Europa are standing by. The militias are eager to join the fight, but their ships, well, they weren't exactly built for this." Kane glanced at the display nearest to him, showing the disparate fleet Earth had managed to cobble together. Sleek battlecruisers from the Earth Defense Forces were joined by older, rusted frigates from the outer colonies, barely held together by patchwork repairs. They'll fight, Kane said, his voice low but resolute. And they'll fight harder than the Empire expects. This isn't just another war for us, Carter. This is survival. Carter hesitated for a moment, then nodded. And what of Helios? He asked quietly, leaning closer so only Kane could hear. The name hung in the air like a secret, a whispered promise of power. Kane's gaze hardened. Helios is ready. I made sure of that years ago. But it's not just a weapon. It's a symbol. We'll deploy it when the time is right. And not a moment before. Before Carter could respond, the heavy doors at the back of the room slid open with a hiss, and Captain Elias Voss strode in. Younger than Kane and Carter, Voss carried himself with the restless energy of a man who thrived on chaos. His flight jacket was slung over one shoulder, his dark hair perpetually tousled, and his cocky grin seemed to dare the universe to challenge him. So, this is where the big decisions are made, Voss said, his voice carrying just enough humor to cut through the tension. Kane turned, raising an eyebrow. You're late. Voss shrugged. Had to make sure my squadron was ready to fly. They're eager to take a shot at those bastards after what we saw. Kane's expression softened just enough to show he wasn't entirely immune to Voss's charm. Good. You'll get your chance soon enough. The conversation was interrupted by a sharp ping from the central console. An officer called out, "Incoming transmission from the Martian Council. They want to speak with you, General." Kane sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Of course they do. He moved to the nearest console, where the holographic image of Counselor Marcus Hale flickered to life. Hale's face was pale, his thin frame accentuated by the flowing robes of Martian authority. He looked every bit the politician, a man more comfortable with debates than battles. "General Kane," Hale began, his voice tinged with a mix of fear and reproach. "We've heard of your plans. An all-out war against the Empire is ambitious. But have you considered the consequences? The risks?" Kane didn't bother hiding his disdain. "Counselor, the Empire hangs 70,000 of our people in cold blood. Do you honestly think we have a choice?" Hale's hologram shifted, his nervous energy making him fidget. "I understand your anger, General, but Mars cannot afford to lose its fleet. Our colony will be next," Kane interrupted, his tone sharp. "Do you think the Empire will stop with Epsilon Prime? They've already shown us what happens to those who resist. If we don't stand together now, there won't be a Mars left to defend." Hale opened his mouth to argue, but then closed it, the weight of Kane's words sinking in. With a reluctant nod, he said, "Very well. Mars will commit its forces. But know this, General. If you fail, the blood of our people will be on your hands." The transmission ended, leaving Kane staring at the empty space where Hale's hologram had been. Carter approached, his voice low. "Diplomatic as always, I see." "I don't have time for politics," Kane replied, turning back to the fleet display. "We need every ship we can get, and I'll drag them into this fight if I have to." Voss, leaning casually against a nearby console, smirked. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, General." Kane shot him a look that was equal parts annoyance and amusement. "You're already on thin ice, Captain. Try to stay focused." As preparations continued, the enormity of the task ahead became increasingly clear. The fleet was assembling, but it was a patchwork of vessels, crews, and resources. The Empire's navy was a monolith, a machine of war that had dominated the galaxy for centuries. By comparison, humanity's forces were a collection of desperate survivors, clinging to the hope that their sheer determination could make up for the difference. Despite the odds, Kane felt a flicker of hope as he toured the base. Engineers worked tirelessly to retrofit ships with stolen or improvised technology. Pilots ran drills, their faces set with grim determination. Everywhere he looked, he saw a shared purpose, a collective will to fight. For the first time in years, humanity wasn't arguing over borders or resources. They were united, bound together by their shared rage and grief. That evening, Kane stood on the observation deck, overlooking the sprawling shipyards where the fleet was being prepared. Carter joined him, silent at first, both men lost in their thoughts. Finally, Carter spoke. "Do you think we can win this?" Kane didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the massive silhouette of Helios, the dreadnought that loomed over the other ships like a sleeping giant. "It's not about winning," he said at last. "It's about showing them we won't be broken, even if it costs us everything." Carter nodded, his expression unreadable. "The men believe in you, you know, even the ones who are afraid." "They don't have to believe in me," Kane said quietly. "They just have to believe in what we're fighting for." As the first stars began to pierce the darkness, a voice crackled over the comm system. "General Kane, the fleet is ready for deployment. Awaiting your orders." Kane straightened, his shoulders squared. The weight of command was heavy, but he bore it without complaint. Turning to Carter, he said, "Let's finish this." Carter nodded, and the two men left the observation deck, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Behind them, the fleet began to move, engines flaring to life as humanity prepared to face its greatest enemy. Kane's resolve was unshakable. The Empire had made the first move, but now it was humanity's turn, and Kane would ensure they struck with the fury of a species that refused to be extinguished. The fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, a sea of metallic shapes silhouetted against the cold expanse of the galaxy. Ahead of them, the imperial stronghold of Zentra loomed like a fortress carved from shadow. Its orbital defenses gleamed in the light of the nearby star, a lattice of deadly platforms bristling with cannons and missile arrays. Zentra was the heart of the Empire's grip on this sector, a symbol of its invincibility. To General Kane, it was also the perfect target. On the bridge of Helios, Kane stood with his arms crossed, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the tactical display. Around him, officers moved with practiced precision, their movements quick but not panicked. The dreadnought's interior was a maze of reinforced corridors and command stations, its design equal parts utilitarian and intimidating. Every inch of the ship radiated power, from its experimental plasma cannons to the massive energy core that hummed beneath their feet. "Enemy defenses are online," Admiral Carter reported, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "We're detecting 3 main defense clusters and a fleet of at least 20 warships in orbit. Heavy cruisers, destroyers, and 1 dreadnought." Kane's jaw tightened. The presence of an Imperial dreadnought complicated matters, but he didn't flinch. He leaned over the holographic table, the display casting blue light across his scarred face. "We stick to the plan. Our goal is to cripple Zentra's command and control systems. Without this stronghold, the Empire's grip on the sector weakens. We don't need to destroy every ship in that fleet, just enough to send a message." Captain Voss, lounging near the edge of the bridge with his trademark swagger, chimed in, "No pressure, right? Just taking on a fleet that outguns us 3-1. A walk in the park." "Save the jokes for after the mission, Captain," Kane said, his tone sharp but not unkind. "You and your squadron are leading the strike on the defense platforms. Neutralize their guns, or we won't last 5 minutes." Voss straightened, his cocky grin fading into a rare look of seriousness. "Understood, General. We'll get it done." Kane nodded and turned his attention to the comms officer. "Signal the fleet. All units, engage on my command." A low tremor ran through Helios as its engines roared to full power, the ship surging forward at the head of the fleet. Around it, smaller frigates and cruisers formed a protective screen, their sleek hulls bristling with weaponry. The enemy fleet began to move as well, a wall of Imperial ships advancing to meet them. The battle was inevitable now, a collision of wills that would leave only one side standing. "Enemy ships within firing range," Carter announced. "They're locking on." Kane raised his hand, his voice calm but firm. "All ships, fire at will." The first volley lit up the void, beams of searing plasma and kinetic slugs streaking across the black. Explosions bloomed like miniature suns as the two fleets clashed, their weapons carving through shields and armor alike. The smaller human frigates darted between the larger Imperial ships, their agility allowing them to strike where the enemy was most vulnerable. But for every Imperial ship destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. On the starboard flank, Voss and his squadron of fighter pilots streaked toward the defense platforms, their ships weaving through a hail of enemy fire. "All right, boys," Voss said over the comms, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Stay tight, stay fast, and watch each other's backs. Let's give these bastards something to remember." The platforms came into view, their cannons swiveling to track the incoming fighters. Voss pushed his throttle to maximum, his ship vibrating as it tore through the gauntlet of fire. "Break and engage," he shouted, and his squadron scattered, each pilot targeting a different platform. The sky erupted into a storm of explosions and tracer fire as the battle intensified. Back on Helios, Kane monitored the strike team's progress while directing the fleet's movements. "Carter, bring us around to target their command ship," he ordered. "If we take out their flagship, we'll disrupt their coordination." The Helios shifted course, its massive cannons swiveling to lock onto the Imperial dreadnought at the center of the enemy formation. The two behemoths closed the distance between them, their weapons unleashing hell. Shields flared and flickered as each ship tried to overpower the other, the sheer energy of their clash threatening to tear the fabric of space itself. "Shields at 70%, an officer reported, her voice strained. "Their main batteries are focused on us." "Hold steady," Kane said. "Keep firing. We're not losing this fight." The Helios shuddered as another barrage struck its hull, but its weapons continued to fire, each shot chipping away at the enemy dreadnought's defenses. Kane's focus never wavered, his mind calculating every move, every possibility. He had faced worse odds before, and he wasn't about to back down now. "General," Carter called out, urgency in his voice. "We're detecting energy spikes from the defense platforms. If they're fully charged, they could cut through our fleet." Kane's eyes narrowed. "What's the status of Voss and his team?" The comms officer answered. "They've neutralized two platforms, but the third is still operational. They're taking heavy fire." Kane's mind raced. They couldn't afford to lose the fleet, not here, not now. "Patch me through to Voss." The comm crackled as Voss's voice came through, strained but determined. "General, we're almost there, but we've lost two ships. That last platform is a tough nut to crack." "Leave it to me," Kane said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned to Carter. "Bring us within range of that platform. Divert power to the forward batteries." Carter hesitated, but only for a moment. "Aye, sir." The Helios altered course, its massive frame turning toward the remaining platform. Kane gripped the edge of the console, his gaze fixed on the target. "All forward batteries, fire on my mark." The platform's cannons swiveled to meet the approaching dreadnought, their barrels glowing with deadly energy. Kane waited, his heart pounding in time with the ship's engines. Then, as the platform fired, he gave the order, "Fire!" The Helios unleashed a devastating volley, its plasma cannons tearing through the platform's shields and obliterating its core. The resulting explosion lit up the battlefield, sending shockwaves rippling through the void. "Platform destroyed," the comms officer reported, her voice filled with relief. Kane allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction before turning back to the tactical display. The enemy fleet was faltering, their formation breaking apart as human ships pressed the attack. The Imperial dreadnought, its shields nearly gone, began to retreat, its engines burning at maximum power. "Should we pursue?" Carter asked. Kane shook his head. "No, let them run. This isn't about chasing them down. It's about showing them we can hit back." As the remaining Imperial ships fled, a cheer erupted across the bridge. Kane didn't join in. His focus was already on what came next. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The Empire would retaliate, and when they did, humanity would need to be ready. Standing tall amidst the celebration, Kane issued his final order of the day. "Signal the fleet. Regroup and prepare for extraction. We've sent our message. Now, let's make sure we're ready for the answer. The chamber was deathly quiet, save for the low hum of Helios' power core reverberating through the steel walls. General Alexander Kane stood in the heart of the ship's war council room, his hands braced on the cold metal table before him. Around him, holographic projections of his officers flickered in a pale blue glow, men stationed on distant colonies, aboard other warships, and on the battered outposts of humanity. They were here not just to celebrate their victory at Zenthra, but to decide what came next. Kane's voice was steady, commanding, as he began. The strike on Zenthra has dealt the Empire a blow they won't soon forget. They know now that humanity isn't just going to roll over and die. But this is only the beginning. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the faces of his officers. We've sent a message. Now, we need to send justice. Admiral Carter leaned forward in his seat, his holographic image shimmering slightly. Zenthra was a tactical victory, but it was just one system. The Empire still outnumbers us 10-1. We can't rely on ambushes and desperation forever. Kane nodded. Agreed. That's why our next move won't be a battle. It will be a statement. The room stiffened at those words, the weight of them sinking in. Captain Elias Voss, patched into the meeting from his quarters, arched a brow. Care to elaborate, General? Because I'm all for bold moves, but I'd like to know what kind of insanity you're cooking up before I throw my squadron into the mix. Kane straightened, his face hard as granite. The Empire's atrocities, the broadcast, the executions, the slaughter of Epsilon Prime, were meant to intimidate us, to show us that resistance is futile. But their strength is also their arrogance. They believe they're invincible. We're going to prove them wrong. He tapped the control on the table, and a new hologram flickered to life. A sprawling cityscape on an alien world, its spires reaching toward a crimson sky. This is Erathon Prime, the Empire's administrative capital for this sector. It's where they coordinate their military operations, oversee their conquests, and broadcast their propaganda. If we strike here, we cut the head off the snake. The room erupted into a cacophony of voices. Officers spoke over one another, their arguments blending into a storm of doubt and concern. Carter's voice rose above the others. With all due respect, General, this is madness. Erathon Prime isn't just heavily fortified, it's the symbolic heart of their control. The risk would be enormous. Kane held up a hand, silencing the room. I'm not asking for opinions. This isn't a democracy. It's a war. And in war, sometimes you have to take risks. Voss leaned back in his chair, his trademark smirk returning. I hate to admit it, but the old man's got a point. If we can pull this off, it'll do more than hurt them. It'll inspire our people. Show them that the Empire can bleed. One of the colony representatives, a grizzled veteran named Commander Holt, spoke up. And if we fail, if this backfires, the Empire will crush us harder than ever before. Kane met Holt's gaze without flinching. I didn't come here to debate failure. Failure isn't an option. I'm asking for your trust, your belief in something greater than fear. Silence fell over the room once more, heavy and oppressive. One by one, the officers nodded, their expressions grim but resolute. They had followed Kane this far, and they weren't about to stop now. The fleet arrived at Erathon Prime under the cover of darkness, its massive sun eclipsed by a nearby gas giant. Using stolen Imperial codes, they slipped past the outermost detection grids, their engines running silent. Kane stood on the bridge of Helios, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the tactical display. The plan was daring, almost suicidal, but it was their best shot. The first phase was surgical. Voss and his squadron launched from Helios, their ships diving toward the planet's surface like falling stars. They targeted the orbital defense platforms and communications relays, disabling them with pinpoint strikes. The Empire wouldn't realize what was happening until it was too late. First wave is clear, Voss reported over the comms, his voice steady despite the chaos. They're scrambling fighters, but we've got a head start. Good work, Kane replied. Prepare for Phase 2. As the fleet moved into position, Kane turned to Carter. Activate Helios protocol. Carter hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. Yes, sir. He entered the command sequence, and Helios' core began to glow brighter, its energy output surging. The ship's experimental weapon systems, built in secret over years of desperation, powered up for the first time in battle. The main cannon fired, a beam of concentrated plasma that cut through the atmosphere and struck Erathon Prime's central power grid. The blast was precise, surgical, disabling the city's shields and plunging its spires into darkness. For the first time in centuries, the Empire's capital was vulnerable. The comms erupted with chatter as the fleet descended into the chaos below. Kane's voice cut through it all, calm and authoritative. All units, proceed to your targets. Remember, we're not here to destroy. We're here to dismantle. On the surface, resistance was fierce. Imperial ground forces swarmed the streets, their advanced armor and weapons making them a formidable foe. But the human strike teams were relentless, their fury driving them forward. They targeted key infrastructure, military command centers, propaganda hubs, and supply depots, crippling the Empire's ability to coordinate. Kane himself led one of the strike teams, his presence on the battlefield inspiring those around him. He moved with precision, his rifle cutting down enemies with ruthless efficiency. Beside him, Carter provided tactical support, his calm demeanor a steadying presence amidst the chaos. As the battle raged, Kane's comm buzzed with an incoming transmission. It was Voss. General, we've got a problem. They're activating a failsafe, an orbital strike platform hidden on the far side of the planet. If they fire that thing, it'll take out the fleet. Kane's jaw clenched. Can you reach it? Not in time, Voss replied. But I've got another idea. I can overload my ship's core and take it out in a suicide run. Denied, Kane said sharply. We don't sacrifice our own. Then you better think of something fast, Voss shot back. Because we're running out of options. Kane's mind raced. Time was slipping away, the balance of the battle teetering on the edge. Finally, he made his decision. Carter, prepare the Helios for an emergency jump. We'll intercept the platform ourselves. Carter's eyes widened, but he didn't argue. Understood. The Helios surged forward, its massive frame accelerating toward the orbital platform. The crew worked in perfect unison, every second bringing them closer to the brink. Kane stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the target ahead. Fire all batteries, he ordered. The Helios unleashed its full arsenal, its weapons tearing through the platform's defenses. Explosions rippled across its surface as critical systems failed. With a final, devastating volley, the platform was destroyed, its remains scattering into the void. Back on the surface, the Imperial forces began to retreat, their command structure in disarray. The human strike teams regrouped, their mission complete. Erathon Prime had fallen, not through brute force, but through precision and determination. As the fleet regrouped, Kane stood on the bridge of Helios, his expression unreadable. They had struck a blow against the Empire, but the war was far from over. The cost had been high, and the road ahead would only grow harder. But for the first time, humanity had hope, and hope, Kane knew, was the most powerful weapon of all.